Can you all hear me? All right. Well, it is wonderful to see everyone today and to be here. We've heard from a number of experts this morning, and we've talked a lot about housing infrastructure, which is a critical nexus for resiliency. But as we continue to grow and urbanize, transportation is really another critical nexus, pushing us to think differently about future solutions. And our panel today is driving, no pun intended, many of those efforts, and I, for one, am very excited to learn more. So I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, have them join me on the stage, and then they will each have a few minutes to talk about their endeavors, and then we will have a moderated Q&A session, and if you all have your own questions, there will hopefully be some time left at the end to answer those. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kim Delaney. Kim is the Director of Strategic Development and Policy for the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. It's a 4-county intergovernmental agency in Southeast Florida. She is a statewide resource with expertise in land use, economics, transportation, natural systems, and public outreach. Dr. Delaney has more than 2 decades of experience working with local governments, elected officials, agencies, investors, and community groups. Among her specialties is entrepreneurial governance, which includes finding ways to leverage public investments for optimal economic returns, environmental enhancement, and improved quality of life. Welcome. Next, we have Kathy Dos Santos, the Executive Director of the Miami Transit Alliance, a nonprofit working to free Miami from traffic by equipping Miamians to influence transit decisions. She led the implementation of Miami-Dade's Better Bus Network redesign, the first community-led bus network redesign nationwide, building sustainable transportation for climate resilience. And, yes, welcome, Kathy. And we are also welcoming Corey Cuff Lonergan, CEO and General Manager of Broward County Transit, Florida's second largest transit system. Corey leads over 1,200 employees, serving 2.1 million residents and more than 25 million annual riders, while advancing Primo, a $5.2 billion investment, adding over 200 miles of premium transit across South Florida. A proven leader with expertise in both the private and public sectors, including CSX, Exelon, Fluor, Metro in Washington, D.C., and SEPTA in Philadelphia. She is recognized for building high-performing teams and driving transformative results. Honored as a 2025 Comto Women Who Move the Nation honoree, Florida Black Panthers Black Excellence Standout and Public Service Awardee, and a recipient of the WTS South Florida Rosa Parks Diversity Leadership Award. Cuff Lonergan holds a Bachelor's of Civil Engineering from the University of Delaware and pursued a Master of Organizational Dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania. So welcome, all 3 of you. So we're going to get started by letting each panelist give us a little bit of background about what gets you out of bed every day. So Kathy, you're up first.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Kathy Dos Santos. I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director at Transit Alliance Miami. If you haven't heard about us yet, well, I'm not surprised. We're not the most common of nonprofit organizations, but what I would say is that we are small but mighty. We are now 10 years old, and for the last 10 years in Miami-Dade, we have been advocating for a Miami built for people, not just cars. And we do this through 3 pillars of work. We do data and research, we do community engagement, and we do policy and planning advocacy. You know, we essentially understand that our built environment is a set of choices. It's a set of policies, and oftentimes we have been experiencing in Miami's context a whole lot of growth, but sometimes lacking that piece of how we move shapes our cities, and it really does matter to people. So we are a network of strategists, advocates, public transit riders, some policymakers, but we are a network of folks that come into this work because we recognize that how we move matters to people's lives, and it is a pleasure to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kim,
Sure.
we have a few slides. Yeah.
I'll run through a couple of slides. So, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to chat with you. Kim Delaney from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. Just confirming, I think the big green arrow button is going to be the arrow to go. Could you put the slides up on the screen that start with that map of Florida? I saw it on this. There we go. So beautiful. And so thanks for the opportunity to address you today. I can't really handle a hello without a couple of slides when you work for the Regional Planning Council. So just a few slides to set the context for the relationship between transportation, resiliency, and land use patterns, really, which is kind of, they all live together in the same house. And when I was preparing for today's discussion, I was kind of scrolling through latest press on resiliency and transportation in Southeast Florida. And I came across this interesting article in U.S. News and World Report, and this is from October. And it really underscores the challenge, I think, that we have with a state that's been very successful in bringing a lot of new people in. So our growth rates are high, but our ability to handle them with infrastructure and impact on environmental resources is strained. And so it's not just a conversation that we're having, it's a nationally recognized challenge that we have as a state. And when I think about how the region has evolved, I always think about how the demographics are changing in the region. And so, of course, we both have the silver tsunami happening, and we're really fighting to bring in millennials and Gen Z and the next generation beyond them. I actually, within my family, as I think about sustainability and transportation in the region, I'm raising two Zoomers. One of them finished his pedigrees at the University of Florida, hates driving, so he analyzed the 3 best cities in North America for walkability and lifestyle, and took his degrees to Chicago, where he sold his car on the journey and now takes a transit pass to work downtown from his apartment in Lakeview. At the other end of the spectrum, I have a boomer in the family who hated the cold but hates driving, and looked at Florida and surveyed most walkable cities in Florida with great lifestyle, and moved to St. Augustine, where she also sold her car, opened a business, and lives a lifestyle that's car-free. So I have that direct set of experiences. It reminds me of Richard Florida's book when we think about both the creative class and the Great Reset. Among the big challenges in Florida to maintain its sustainable employment base is the transportation relationships that we really struggle with. We know that the national trends have buyers that are seeking healthy lifestyles and walkable places, and so that's one of our challenges in transportation and resiliency in the region. Pardon me. The morning's discussions about affordability really struck a chord because I had been working through some affordability and transportation data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So some of you may be familiar with this data. There's a fairly recent study that was produced that illustrates in Southeast Florida, although the rest of the nation has about a 50% of the annual household budget committed to housing and transportation costs, we have a 60%, 62% of the annual budget. And if you're lower income, that number is higher. So if you're a single parent with kids, that percentage can be 70%, 72%. And so it's not a surprise that we have the struggles with resiliency and resilient employment. Perpetual affordability in housing is tied to also perpetual access to jobs and work and recreation and social activities. And so those two things live in the same house. In our region now, the average is $14,000 a year in transportation costs, but if you are lower income, those numbers are higher. Pardon me. And so we see in land use patterns, of course, a shift from the auto-dominated environment that we really have inherited in many ways to one that's more people-focused. And we have evolving transportation choices in the region. And so Hopefully somebody came by train. I know a couple of my friends did from South Florida. And so we have an evolution in choices for transportation modes. More choices gives us more access, and that gives us better sustainability. And when we think about the transportation land use relationship, I always enjoy this graph, and I've seen it in a couple different ways, but when you have transportation meeting land use allocation, if you're able to shift some trips to transit from auto-dominated conditions, then we have a lesser impact on the transportation network. We don't need as much asphalt. We don't need as many parking spaces. However, when we think about the vehicles, it doesn't matter that we have technology improvements in vehicles if they're all still taking a space on the road and a parking space to store them. And so that shift to multimodal conditions is really a cornerstone to maintaining sustainability in the region. We do have transit-oriented development on the horizon, and in a big way. So these are images from the 3 counties that illustrate the scale of TOD that's in motion. Transit-oriented development, of course, is that pattern of development that's near transit corridors, around transit stations, that really emphasizes walkability. Every transit trip starts and stops as a pedestrian. So the better a job we can do with pedestrian conditions, the more successful we are with transit. But by the way, every trip on every other mode starts and stops as a pedestrian too. So it's not just getting the walkability right around the stations, it's also improving the transportation corridors that we have to make a more civilized experience. So either at a small scale with adding appropriate infrastructure for shade tolerance and to mitigate heat impacts, or at a larger scale where we're retrofitting corridors, these are the ways that we can improve the sustainability and the resiliency of the transportation network in the region to make a better condition. So I just thought I'd set that up for context. Thanks.
Thank you. That's great. And Corey.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Claudia. I'm just going to take a second before we roll tape here to thank for the opportunity to be here this afternoon and to be a part of this summit. And you know, Claudia, you asked the question, what makes us come to work every day? I'm paraphrasing what you said, but I got to tell you, what makes me come to work every day is those 25 million folks that choose to use our system, as well as the 1,300 employees that we have that work at Broward County Transit. And so that's what helps me come to work every day, but it also keeps me up at night, because that is a major responsibility for that level of people and number of people. And it's good because what we do is we provide a mobility option for folks that, quite frankly, many of whom don't have options to use a car, and so that obviously benefits the environment from that perspective, but we have a variety of choice riders that do choose us, and that benefits the environment as well. So I just want to take a moment to share a video that our team put together to tell you a little bit about who we are. We are the 2nd largest transit agency in the state of Florida, and then there's more.
Broward County Transit is building the future. A future with more than 200 miles of new premium transit service. A future that is electrified, making it easier to work, live, and play. Wherever your journey leads, we're here for you. Broward County Transit, powered by Primo.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think, you know, there are so many directions we could go with this conversation, and I really appreciate what you had to say, Kim, because I think that helped sort of tee up a lot of the opportunity that we have in South Florida. But just to level set the discussion on this nexus with resilience, I'm going to start with a question for you, Kathy. How would you define a resilient transportation system? And why is that so important in South Florida today?
It's a really great question. And I think when we're talking about public transit, I think more so less of a definition and almost like a multiple choice checklist, where I think we have to embrace mobility and resilient mobility as a broad definition in order to enable the planning and then the uptake of choosing to leave the car behind every now and then, if not completely, and making some really amazing choices like going car-free. So if I have to start defining that checklist, and I definitely challenge folks to, if I missed anything, come up to me and help add to my checklist. But I would say that resilient transportation is transportation that reduces emissions, that makes our cities more prepared to handle extreme weather events, that is cost-effective per trip, and that is effective at moving people. Some of the things that I picture when I picture these things is bus networks. I picture rail. I picture automated people movers. But I also definitely picture bike lanes and sidewalks and bus shade infrastructure. And all these things realistically have to work together. And to be quite honest, if I had to pick sort of like the heroes of resilient transportation, I would say biking and walking, because no transit trip happens without that infrastructure. And thank you, Kim, for shouting that out, because it is truly important. And I think it's also a winning argument. Even if you don't use public transit, you are likely to walk down a sidewalk or take your kids down a bike lane. And it's a much more approachable way, and it also creates ties to community and gets people out of their homes.
That's great. I think, one of the biggest challenges is a lot of this is about behavior change, right? And, change is hard. But in order for people to even have the choice, right, we have to make investments in other types of infrastructure and resilient infrastructure that people can choose to use. So from that perspective, Kim, what does it mean to design a transportation system that provides convenient access, and what should South Floridians think about? What types of solutions would be the right solutions to invest in?
Sure, it's a great question. So as we think about the conditions that we're in South Florida, we have land use patterns that are a little antiquated versus the modern transportation choices that we have. So where new streets are being designed with complete streets infrastructure, wider sidewalks, safe bike lanes, better crosswalks, better lighting, those streets are ahead of the curve, but a lot of the network is an older network that doesn't have those amenities. So as we think about the redevelopment in our communities, the redevelopment of the transportation network to bring it up to a standard that really handles the traveling public in its many different modes, either in a vehicle, using transit, bike ped rolling in a wheelchair, being pushed in a stroller, heading out on a scooter, right? There's a whole series of modes that are out there. We have a transportation network that really has been designed to accommodate one type of mode, and it doesn't have those modern features in the extent that it could. And so that's where we see a big focus on opportunity.
So, to that point, development patterns play into this a lot, right? And if we can capture trips and focus on shorter trips that have that last mile element, then we're putting the population in a better position to make a choice that would be more resilient. So with transit-oriented development, Corey, I know that Broward has focused a lot on this with Primo, the Premium Mobility Plan. So can you talk some about how you all are encouraging higher density development and trip capture, and how that connects with housing options?
Sure. So the video alluded to this, but we are, at Broward County, we're investing about $5.3 billion in a new transit system that's going to add about 200 miles of new transit service. And what's included in that are premium services that move the masses throughout the county. And so it's multimodal. So we're going to have light rail, we're going to have commuter rail, we're going to have bus rapid transit and high frequency bus service. Again, the reality is that South Florida cannot build lanes of traffic out of the predicament that we're in. As we continue to grow and attract more people to South Florida, the highway solution is not the solution. And so while my colleagues here talk about walkable communities, first mile, last mile, those kinds of solutions, plus transit, I think are the best solutions overall to the transportation challenges that we face today and that are yet to come. And so when you think about the conversation around affordable housing, transit-oriented development, what Broward has done is the corridors where these new transit services are going to be on are corridors that have already been recognized for the potential for high-density housing. Again, at the end of the day, the best combination is one where people can walk, people can ride bikes, people, first of all, can be safe in whatever mode of transportation they choose to use, but also that they live in an environment where things are very close to them, whether they walk there, bike there, or take transit there, where the car is not the only way that you can get to work, to play, to learn, and to live.
So you talked some about the affordability component, right? And I think that's, one of the biggest hurdles when it comes to transportation investments from a couple of different standpoints, right? I mean, first of all, we have infrastructure rising costs with construction costs. Just making investments in the system itself has some barriers. And then beyond those barriers, we have barriers to entry from the community and those who may not have the luxury of choosing a place to live that is convenient to transit. So I know that's a big issue, but I'm curious from each of you, you come at this from some unique viewpoints. Where do you stand on that affordability issue? What are some of the solutions and ways that you think that we can each make a difference in helping to eliminate those barriers?
I'll lead that.
I'll get us started on that. I do have to say it's a big question to tackle. And there's certainly I think from our perspective as a nonprofit that is honestly trying to change hearts and minds. That is, as you mentioned earlier, trying to get people to understand the importance of making a different choice in terms of how we move. Because at this moment in time, like upwards of, I'm going to butcher this number, but I want to say it's like 95% of trips are happening in a car. It's definitely in the 90s. I might be, give or take a few, but it's definitely in the 90s. Yet, in Miami-Dade, 46% of trips are under 3 miles. That is a very competitive space for things like biking, like some micromobility with the appropriate infrastructure and whatnot. And yet, most people are choosing to take on that really big number that Kim had on the screen, which is $14,400 annually. That's the cost of transportation. And the reality is that how people are taking that cost in is unlike housing in the sense that it's in pieces. You'll take your car payment, you'll take your tolls, you'll take your insurance, and maybe folks are not seeing it as a whole picture of how heavy those almost $15,000 actually weigh on you at the end of the year. And the other aspect of that is that we do have to talk about housing and transportation together when we're talking about affordability. And the reason for centering affordability in the first place is to make it real to people, because folks will tell you all types of sort of reasons for how they move, and they're all valid. They're making the best choice for themselves at the end of the day, or at least how they perceive it and understand it. Everybody's commute is different. But when we're getting to the point of creating a wider narrative of why a shift or a further investment in public transit is important, affordability really does carry that weight because people understand what that cost means. So in terms of strategies, to me really is a question of really strong messaging and really strong communications of what public transit can do for you, for your community, and for your neighbors. Because again, back to my earlier little point, everybody's commute can be quite unique. No, there's no overarching solution. You'll adjust one bus line and you'll make a whole lot of people happy, but then a whole lot of other people will be like, well, now you messed my entire commute up. But there there is critical data that can guide transportation decisions. And the rest of that, in my opinion, is also about building infrastructure. And even that has to be done with an eye for where is it economically viable, what is going to create the most impact, and also where is it the most needed. And I do think that's something we have to center along affordability in this, is that we need to acknowledge that the investments oftentimes that we're making is honestly, because a lot of them are powered by new housing, by new development, are perhaps in places that have some alternatives, and it becomes a economic gap issue, where those neighborhoods that are not seeing new development don't get any of these other alternatives, despite the fact that they very much need it. So I would say, centering affordability is about bringing more and more people into this tent and creating a wider belief that when your street change or when your transportation options change, it's for the net positive.
Okay, so I'm going to have to self-identify that I absolutely have a bias to transit, in case you haven't noticed. I say that because I want you to just think about those of us in the room, right? We probably own a car, right? Most of us own a car, okay? We probably are paying a car note, right? Yes? If you're lucky, maybe no, but if you still, probably, right? We have insurance, right? So that's an additional expense. And then we have the monthly expense of gas, which fluctuates. Okay, and so over the last 10 years or so, you can look at gas prices and you've seen they've gone up and they've gone down. What I can tell you about affordability when it comes to transportation, because at the policy level, there's always been this decision to subsidize it at some level, not as much as highways subsidize our automobile movement, but it is always subsidized at a level where it inherently is affordable. And so I want you to think about your daily expense for your car, your insurance, and your gas, and I will tell you that my system for one trip only costs $2. I think that's inherently affordable. I also want to say that that's one way. If you get a pass, that $2, a monthly pass or a weekly pass or a daily pass, that one trip gets down to about $1 and some change. So again, an inherently affordable. Does that satisfy every body in the entire economic spectrum? Probably not. There are some people that live at a level that even that dollar can be a bit much for them. But I would also argue that for those that are in a position that can choose, I ask you to try transit because it is an affordable option. And the biggest advantage is, from my perspective, is a concept that I call resilient mental health, right? A lot of people don't always directly associate a commute to work in terms of mental health. But I know when you're stuck in traffic and you're trying to get somewhere, your blood pressure is at its lowest, not probably. You're probably clenching the wheel. You're upset, you're angry, you're anxious, you're a whole bunch of stuff that lends itself not to the best mental health state. And so if you look at the health advantages of being driven somewhere by somebody else, that makes things a lot more affordable from that perspective as well. So I just want you to kind of think about your next trip, and please try us. We'd love to have you.
So I'll jump in there. And by the way, my apologies, because I didn't answer the question, what motivates me? Gets me out of the bed in the morning.
Well, answer now.
So it's going to be
There's still time.
It's going to be optimism because it's. I mean, when you put your uniform on every day and you're working for the Regional Planning Council, you have to believe it's getting better because it's hard to look 20 years out and think it's not. So optimism is the driver. And at the Regional Planning Council, I've always believed the core of the mission of the council is education. And we carry that out in lots of different ways, but trying to get zoomed up and zoom out and look long term to understand what's coming and how can we be best positioned to handle that. And so on the question of affordability, I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way, which is what's the cost to us if we don't invest in a multimodal system? And I'll use Tri-Rail as the example, right? Because Tri-Rail is having a moment with respect to funding. Our partners at South Florida Regional Planning Council just finished up an excellent study that looks at economic benefit of Tri-Rail, for example. And it's tricky when you get into the land of economic analysis. There is no study that says this road pays for itself. Yes, by the way, you can't find that. Toll-financed highways also don't pay for themselves. We just don't capitalize and account for those dollars long term. So as you're rebuilding the road over time, you actually have lost money in that process. But for transit, you can count the number of people getting on the bus, and then you can do a division and determine whether or not your ROI was positive or negative. There is no transit system on Earth that generates a profit, but then again, there isn't a library that generates a profit. There isn't a park that generates a profit, and there aren't a lot of schools that generate profit because they're part of having a civilization. So I just give that to you for perspective. So as we think about Tri-Rail, for example, Tri-Rail is carrying 16,000 people a day. That's a lane, roughly a lane of traffic on 95. So, not to scare you, but without Tri-Rail, man, it's going to be busy on I-95. So with respect to Tri-Rail's system today, there's 19 stations. Tri-Rail is it's boosting $1.6 billion in property value within just a mile. And by the way, it's not just a mile of impact. That's just reasonably the amount of impact that was measured in the study, right? A very defensible position. It's supporting $300 million a year in GDP and $300 million a year in personal income. So if you don't have those systems, affordability becomes very different. So you lose predictability, you lose reliability, you have more absenteeism, you have, by the way, all those people on the interstate tend to cause things to go sideways, so you have more crashes that have more human impact with high cost to those individuals and everyone around them. So I think about the affordability question in that way. The other thing I'll throw out just quickly, we finished a statewide study on economic benefit of trails in the state of Florida, and we looked at the Sun Trail network. We found up to a 14-to-1 return on investment for Sun Trail facilities that are designed with land use as part of the consideration and with good access, but 14-to-1 on that is pretty respectable, right? So as we think about the investments that we make in the transportation network, there's different ways to measure those impacts. One is how much less does it cost me to make my journey? And on the flip side, how much more do I benefit from making these investments in a smart, long-term, balanced way? So, thoughts?
Great, yeah. So we have a little less than 10 minutes, and I'm hoping you all in the audience are working on some hard-hitting questions for our panelists. So let's use this next few. If you could dictate where funding would go for a sustainable and resilient transportation investment, what would it be? And Corey, you're going to have to get more detailed than just transit.
Guess
because
what my
that's the
answer
given.
is? You want to guess?
I think
You think it's transit?
I do.
Good. Just kidding. No, I won't be that selfish. I do think that is by far, you said one, but I'm going to do two. I do think that that's by far one of the best investments that we can make to move the masses and looking to the future and looking at what potentially could be a very congested South Florida area. I used to live in Southern California when LA, which is still a non-attainment zone, was, and the smog was just everywhere all the time, every day. I don't want to see that for South Florida. I would hope that our trade winds are helpful in terms of preventing that from happening, but that's not necessarily the case. But I think the other investment that I would love to see is for us to work on smart land use planning that puts, again, people in places where the communities are walkable, that are accessible, and that you can use some kind of microtransit or transit to also get to places a little further from where you live, work, learn, and play. And so that would be what my investments would be in. And okay, again, back to transit, yes.
Thank you. Kathy?
Oh my goodness, you're trying to make an advocate pick, and that's a hard one. My cheat answer is that I would take that funding and I would run a statewide campaign that finds a source, recurring source of revenue for public transit statewide. That would be my cheat answer. If I have to pick a real answer, and hoping that we're gonna continue to be around for another 10 years or more, and continue to fighting for ensuring that public transit is fully subsidized. Well, it's currently in Miami-Dade subsidized at around 70%, and even that sometimes gets an argument for folks, but it needs to be subsidized because it is not a money-making scheme. It is a public good that it's meant to move people. So, considering that we'll continue to be here to fight for that, I would say that I would build a county, if not tri-statewide, investment on bike and pedestrian networks, because the first and last mile truly has been an issue for communities far and wide in our region. And again, going back to that point of ensuring that our communities that don't have the best access to transit currently can get there with what we have and using what we have more effectively and more efficiently, I think it's a critical priority for this time in this political and economic environment we're in.
So it's hard to pick one, right? So, but to Corey's point, the transportation land use marriage that we have forgotten, but we're reacquainted with now, right? They live in the same house. As a region, Southeast Florida has SEFTEC, the Southeast Florida Transportation Council, which does an excellent job of analyzing and forecasting transportation conditions among the three counties, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade. So we have about 6 million people in the region, the Tri-County region now. We're gonna have 7.4. That's 1,000 people a week, by the way. That's the forecast. Moving into the region, it might be a bit busy, right, with that volume of population. There's an adage that I always smile at when I hear, which is that widening roads to combat congestion is like loosening your belt to combat obesity. It actually doesn't work. So we can't make I-95 triple-decked, right, to move the people on I-95 in every individual vehicle. So I think our best job in learning from all the great practices, both internally within the region, we have great examples, and externally, to better stitch together the land use transportation relationship with good urbanism, with a mix of uses that enables a park once environment, that doesn't lend us into a situation where we're spending $25,000 a space for surface parking or $35,000 to $40,000 a space for structured parking. There's garages I go into, there are no oil stains in the garage, but they had to build it. So all that money that went into building a garage didn't get spent on doing other things, which is unfortunate. So that land use transportation relationship, I think, is key. And then repairing the roadway network, I will throw in as an investment opportunity that makes us more efficient. As we think about repairing the roadway network, and we're doing a lot of that, great, like nationally success story kind of examples in the region. I'm so proud to be a part of the region because we're doing great work. We have a lot more work to do to fix the roadway network so that it appropriately can accommodate all the users of the traveling public. We are the most dangerous state in the nation to go bicycling. We are often in the top 2 or 3 for the most dangerous state in the nation for pedestrians. Not a surprise that people don't want to walk and bike. They're reading the newspaper too, right? So doing our best job in improving that condition will make us more efficient. It'll make us more sustainable.
Great points. And one thing that we did not spend too much time on, I wish we had more time, but is the technology element. And I think I heard a couple things that relate. A more efficient system. If we want to have a better performing system, technology is something that can help. And Corey, I also wanted to give you a shout out because the low emission fleet, right? I mean, this is a big impact too. So transit, not only is it moving more people, you can also do your part through technology to contribute to a more sustainable future. So well done. I know all the transit systems in South Florida are investing in these types of technologies. So with that, we have time for a question or two. If anybody would, yes, please approach the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion. I'm kind of curious about what your thoughts are about the prospects for technologies such as like the automated, what do I want to say, the driverless vehicles like Waymo. I understand that they might take up the same space, but if you had like minivan sorts of situations, you're signing up, you're doing ride share with an autonomous electric vehicle, provides flexibility that doesn't frankly exist today for a lot of users. And it seems to me that that provides a tremendous opportunity moving forward with an element that we don't currently have embedded as part of our system. And I'm just curious as to where you think those opportunities might fit into some of the needs and plans that you've described.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that question, because I do think that there is a lot of space to grow in an autonomous vehicle market. And I know that that Florida, we actually have a plant in Jacksonville that's being built for autonomous vehicles that are going to be about the size of a large van that can carry about 20 people or so on it. So we are really in that space, and it's a good thing that Florida is leading at the charge in this in the U.S. market. I think the other thing when it comes to autonomous vehicles, they do work. We know they work. We just need regulation to catch up and allow us to be able to use them as appropriate, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge is that, in mixed traffic, it's still not an option to use autonomous vehicles for large occupancy vehicles like buses and light rail vehicles, et cetera. So we've kind of constrained that way to be able to use that technology. But at some point in time, hopefully, as the technology evolves, it will be something that is a viable option for us. But I just want everybody to also keep in mind that autonomous vehicles, they do have a place for us all, but it could potentially displace people who need jobs also. And part of the equation is to figure out the retraining and retooling of our workforce so that when these opportunities come from a technology perspective, that we still have options for people to be viable contributors to our economy. And I think that's all part of the equation.
Wonderful. All right, well, do you want to, we are out of time. Technically, do you want to add something before we wrap? Or
I mean, I'd be happy. On autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. On autonomous vehicles, we have a couple pilots in the region. It's an efficiency improvement. So anywhere we can find efficiency improvements is really beneficial to us from a resiliency standpoint. And they play a role. As Corey mentioned, we're in a little bit of a policy gap right now where we don't really have the ability to use them in their most effective manner. But I think 5 years out, we'll probably have a framework that allows that mode to be supplanted. So I'm enthusiastic about it, and it's an interesting vehicle. There are pilots in Boca, pilots in Port St. Lucie. I think West Palm is working on one as well. So there's a couple of examples that are out there now that seem to be serving a good role.
I'll jump in really briefly. And I do believe that this doesn't necessarily change what both of my colleagues up here have mentioned. I am a slight skeptic when it comes to the autonomous vehicles in terms of the testing that will be needed, that has to happen in real cities for the question of safety. There is, proven track record that it has difficulty identifying folks that are darker skinned, for example, or identifying fast-moving objects quickly enough. And granted, humans also have these issues, but that's also why we center our advocacy in terms of, providing alternatives to get people from behind the wheel. I do have to say, if I have to pick an autonomous vehicle that has to say this is better than that, the idea of being able to move more and more folks in something like an autonomous bus where you still have an operator that can support with customer service or questions and things like that is also an exciting idea, because I also know that operators do like 3 jobs in one. But I am still a bit of a skeptic. It's not to say that there's not a huge room for innovation in this space, but there's also a lot that we can do with data. There's a lot I think we can still explore in terms of building materials for roadways that are more permeable. And there's definitely a whole lot of innovation. I do have to say that autonomous vehicles take a lot of space in the conversation around transportation. And I would also say that it's super important to go for innovative ideas. It's also super important to fund the things that we know work.
Good point. Well, thank you all so much. This is a really insightful discussion.